Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy, on location today at my home club's dark site, the Black Nugget Lake Observatory. And today we're talking about this, the Sigma 24mm f1.4 DG DN lens, released in 2022. So now a 3-year-old lens. And why am I reviewing a 3-year-old lens? Well, I've of course reviewed much older lenses. This lens is on loan from Sigma Canada, thanks to them. That is the extent of their involvement here, though. They're just sending me lenses to test, and I feel really fortunate because I no longer have to buy them, which gets expensive, especially if you've counted how many reviews I've done. Why this lens in particular? Well, I'm going to be honest, I just started at the top of the list and started just telling them lenses that I haven't tested yet. And so this is one of the first ones. So that's exciting. So of course, this is one of Sigma's Art series lenses released for mirrorless cameras. And the lens itself is available for Sony E-mount and Leica L-mount. I don't suspect it's going to be released for RF or Z-mount anytime soon, but if at some point in the future you're watching this and it is, congratulations. As with most art lenses, it's really well appointed. And just take the pedal hood off here. It's got a release button and of course, pedal shape and a nice combo of a rubber around the edge and some knurling. And that lets us assess the lens here, which is actually fairly compact, which is nice. The lens, of course, does have a physical aperture ring, which I am always a great fan of. It is declickable here if you are the type that does double duty with video and you want to use that. And there's also a lock here. And this locking mechanism will keep the lens in whichever mode you want to be in. So if you want to keep it in the physical aperture zone, you can do that. And if you'd rather have it on the A setting there where you can control it from the camera and you don't want to have to worry about accidentally bumping things, that's where that lock comes in real handy, because I know I'm not everyone. Some people absolutely hate the aperture rings. And here we've got quite a large array of options actually. This debuted some of these along with the 20mm f1.4. We've got, of course, our autofocus manual focus switch, our custom button, but we also have our focus lock switch here. So this is really useful, especially for astrophotography, because it allows you to basically switch off the focus ring, which is nicely dampened, actually. As far as manually coupled rings go, I like it. It's nice. But this switch will allow you to decouple this ring and lock your focus. And as long as there's no thermal expansion or contraction, your focus shouldn't shift throughout the night. If we look under the pinch cap, we have a 72mm filter thread and a fairly wide front element that always bodes well for things like vignetting performance. And if we look on the back here, we do have a little rubber gasket, a hint of a rubber gasket, as is common with a lot of the E-mount lenses. I'm assuming there is like some really thin dimensions there that only allow a slight gasket, but I assume it's there for a reason, and well, I'm not going to test that. So yeah, it's a really compact lens, feels great in the hand as you would expect. I guess the only thing is to pop it on the LighTrack and see how it actually performs. So let's head over to Lightroom now and see how it did. Hey folks, welcome to Lightroom, where we are looking at the Sigma 24mm f1.4 DG DN Art lens released in 2022. Now, about 3 years ago. Holy cow, time flies. This feels like yesterday. Oy. All right, well, here we have some samples. I probably mentioned this in the intro, but Sigma Canada lent me this lens, which I am appreciative of, but there's no agreements, there's no compensation, there's no expectations. No one gets to review this before it goes out. It's just something that they did. They get a little bit of advertising one way or the other out of it. I get access to a lens that I don't have to buy, and everyone hopefully wins. And hopefully you win because you'll get an idea about whether this fairly recent lens is worth picking up. As we can see here in the top of the screen, there was Aurora. There's always Aurora anytime I try and do any sort of lens test, but we may do. It might not be the cleanest set of samples or the darkest set of samples, but we'll do what we can. There's also a bit of haze in the atmosphere. There was some clouds coming through. So you know what? It's a real world test. Not everything can be perfect. And I just have to remember that the perfect is the enemy of the good, and the good is the enemy of the good enough. So with that in mind, let's talk about it. So we have this lens in Sony E-mount. We're using the Sony a7R Mark V 60 megapixel camera to be as hard on this lens as possible. We are likewise doing 60-second exposures, tracked exposures, to get the best out of it that we possibly can. And we're tracking with the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II because Fervent Astronomy is the North American distributor for Fornax Mounts. So if you're interested in learning more about that, head on over to ferventastronomy.com. We're running through the aperture range from f1.4 all the way to 2.8, and we are shooting this camera at ISO 320 because that is its second base ISO. Around the top of the screen, there should be a link popping up to take you to a video to explain what ISO invariance is if you are not already aware, or if you're interested more in an article, in the description of the video is a link. It'll take you back to Fervent Astronomy, and there'll be a couple of things. There'll be a link to an article talking about ISO invariance, but also there will be a link to the samples, which you can download in full RAW. You can pixel peep, process them, see if the aberrations are to your liking. But as always, as a copyright holder, I just ask you to use them in good faith for the personal assessment of the lens and for no other reason. Thank you so much. And let's go through a couple of these. It's a little bit different, a little bit wonky. I think this is a focus check, and I know it's kind of bright, but we're using a Batinov mask. These diffraction spikes, once they all line up symmetrically, we know that we're in focus on that point source. And here we're at least in focus in the center. And here, this shot, and while I understand things are in the murk here in the clouds, this was a little test for aperture vignetting. And I can say that aperture vignetting is the least of this lens's worries if this is anything to go off of. We will talk about that in a bit. But before we do, here are two samples, 30-second samples. And this one was taken wide open, this one at 2.8, 12,800 with the caps on with a modified camera, full spectrum camera, actually. And this shows you that there is no internal light pollution in this lens. So modified camera users, you can use it safely, albeit depending on your mod and the type of sensor filters and stuff, you know, you might find yourself not quite getting the flat field that you might otherwise have expected. So please keep that in mind. As well, Nikon users, if you are adapting this E-mount lens to a Nikon Z mount using one of the plentiful autofocusing adapters available, please keep in mind that Nikon uses a much thinner sensor filter than Sony does, and wide field and fast lenses can tend not to play as nicely with the Nikon Z mount as Sony E-mount when they're natively made for Sony. This being a Sigma lens, it's made to work on Sony, it's made to work on L-mount. I would imagine Sigma was kind of planning eventually to have it be brought out in other mounts, hopefully. You're probably safe here, but definitely observe things like return periods, maybe test the lens first before you really commit to it. So keep that in mind. All right, so now I've got all that yapping done. Let's pop in here to the f1.4 sample. And if we take a look on the navigator, we can see better the vignetting. And one thing I noticed about this lens, and I believe I took the hood off and tried some samples that way as well. We have the vignetting as you would expect, right, in the corners, but there's almost like a flat letterboxing on the left and right. Like it's much darker in a what seems like just a vertical line. So I don't know what that's about, but it was there, and it did not seem to be coming from the hood. It just seems to be the lens. So I don't know what would cause that. I don't know if the path of the light cone somehow maybe clips on something inside the Sony camera on the way through the shutter or whatnot. That's the only thing I could think of that would lead to these vertical lines. So this is interesting, but it is what you could expect if you're using this, at least on Sony. I don't know. I really am now kicking myself for not testing this lens on my ZF. I didn't think about that. Anyway, here we go. That's what it is. This is f1.4. Now keep in mind that there was some haze, there was some clouds. So, you know, the contrast, take it with a grain of salt, but 1.4, 1.6, There does seem to be a bit of a hot spot at 1.4 that is rectified, stopping down to 1.6. I don't think we're losing any general exposure in the corners, but yeah, it's a little bit tough to tell. If we stop down to 1.8 here, again, it's increasing the contrast, it looks like, although I do suspect you're getting a little dark in the corners. It's harder to tell for me though, because I think some of the blacks are clipping. So, you know, keep that in mind. F2, 2.2, 2.5, and 2.8. This is what you can expect. 1 minute exposure. And I don't know if I'm seeing things or not, but I still see those black vertical lines. Maybe I'm just hallucinating. Comment below. It helps the algorithm. Okay, let's take a peek in the center. All right, and right off the bat, we see that there's a tiny bit of chromatic aberration maybe, which isn't too bad. I do see a little directional fuzziness, and I'm wondering, oh, but I don't see it right here, which is still very close to the center. So I'm wondering if that's a little bit of chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration named after coma from comets, because a comet, as it gets into the inner solar system, gets all fuzzy as it starts to melt. And that looks, I suppose, similarly to coma in a lens. So in a lens, you'll get a more defined side of a star, a point light source, and then some fuzz. Could be slight, could be heavy, and typically all that fuzz will point either towards the edges in the case of external coma, or point all towards the center in the case of internal coma. And in this case, it does appear that there is a little bit of it happening, and it does happen sometimes. That is one of the things that contributes actually to a loss of contrast. It's essentially slight blooming. So let's stop down to 1.6. And there we go. Right away, we see that a little bit of fuzziness has resolved, which is great. There does appear to still be some shape change happening to some of the stars, especially this far into the center. We're basically right in the center. So it could be a little bit of astigmatism, which we'll talk about in a moment. But let's stop down to 1.8. Maybe even better. Yeah, it looks not bad actually. 1.8, I'm starting to lean towards 1.8 on this lens. F2, not a huge change. Chromatic aberration, not really an issue by, I would say 1.6. And F2, 2.2, yeah, 2.5 and 2.8. If you're a 2.8 type of person, you know who you are, but you do lose a lot of exposure going that closed down. Let's take a look at this corner. It might be the worst corner, so let's do that. Okay, so we are seeing some astigmatism and some field curvature. So first of all, this is not coma. Coma is what we described earlier, a little bit of fuzziness. These shape changes, often seen in the corners and edges, this is usually, almost always, astigmatism. Astigmatism, what is that? Well, it can happen in your eye, it can happen in a lens, in a camera. Basically, you can imagine there's radii coming from the center to the edge of the frame here, because it's a curved circle, essentially. And along those radii, anywhere there's a point light source, there will be, in the case of tangential astigmatism, a stretching along that line. So you will find that stars will elongate, and depending on where you are in the frame, they will change direction because they're all elongating towards the center of the frame, basically from the edges. So that is tangential astigmatism. Sagittal astigmatism, in the case of these two stars, is pinky orange and purple. You can slightly see that there's something happening in the other direction. So at a right angle to the radii is coming this way. At a right angle to that, you're getting this other stretching, that's sagittal astigmatism. Essentially, the lens is having trouble focusing. This is a good example. It's having trouble focusing a pinpoint into a pinpoint. So it's stretching out in one axis, stretching out in another axis. And these are actually independent. You can have more of one than the other. You can have one rectify as you stop down, not the other one. So these are often a common complaint in astrophotography. So this is an especially bright star, so it's showing things fairly clearly. So this is the sagittal, and this is the tangential astigmatism, and coupled with chromatic aberration and some field curvature. So what is field curvature? Well, see how things here, in addition to being stretched, just kind of look not quite right, look a little wider, a little fuzzy. If we jump right to the center, you can see we've got nice little happy stars, they're nice, small, they're roundish. When we jump out here, and even though it's stretched, they've gotten big. Like, it shouldn't be this big. What's going on? Well, As I said earlier, you're taking light, you're trying to focus it through curved glass elements. And because of that, and the fact that you're trying to project them onto a flat surface, you have a lot of these aberrations. And one of them is a difference in focus from the center to different parts of the frame. So a lot of lenses will lose focus as you go towards the edges and corners. And sometimes you'll get really weird manifestations where you'll have almost a halo that is out of focus, and then things get a little bit more in focus and all kinds of different things. But it really is just due to the fact that the lens can't focus the stars at this part of the frame onto the sensor in a completely equivalent focal plane to this. Oh, we got some, look at the galaxies. So it is not the best. I'm gonna be a little bit heavy-handed here. This is not the best field curvature. This is pretty heavy. If we come in, ooh, even in the mid frame, that's not great. And the astigmatism is coming in quite close here, right? These stars are stretching. Look where we are in the frame. And we've got a bit of the coma. Ooh, this one's everything happening here. So yeah, it's not amazing. Just call a spade a spade. If we stop down 1.6, that coma starts to fix. The tangential astigmatism doesn't. And 1.8 actually looks way better. So that part at least. But one thing you will notice here, if we go up to this corner, if we stop down 1.6, 1.8, f2, 2.2, 2.5, and 2.8, things have reduced a little bit, but they're not getting more in focus. That's because at infinity, there's no depth of field that you can recover by stopping down. So this is beyond the plane of acceptable focus, as they would say. And yeah, weird shapes, maybe interesting shapes. I'm not here to judge the shapes themselves, but what will happen is they will make stars along the corners and edges look bigger than they ought to. And as you go towards the center, things will get tighter and a little more proper looking. And it will kind of give the, I would imagine, sense that you're looking through like pop bottle glasses or like really thick glass where it's sort of distorting things towards the edges a little bit. I don't like these personally for time lapses because you can actually watch the stars change shape as they come through the field. And to me, that's distracting. But if it was a Aurora Milky Way time lapse, maybe not my favorite, but Aurora time lapse, probably no one's going to notice, or just Aurora shots themselves. You're focused on the pretty colors, not so much the tiny points. So, I mean, every lens has its place. Some of them excel at certain things more than others. This one, maybe not the best at stars. So here is this really aggressive bit of astigmatism. Let's stop down to 1.6. Nothing happening there. 1.8. It's like barely trying to rein itself in. F2, 2.2. Not really any better. Maybe a little bit. 2.5. Yeah, 2.8. Not fixing anything. So, you know what? That is what it is. This is not the most expensive 24mm f1.4 in the market. So taking all this into account, I'd probably shoot this lens at f1.8, but that's just me. I'm sure some would be totally happy at 1.4. Some people will be totally happy at 2.8 or f4, depending on what you're doing. So if we look at this one again, this was this shot with the really bright star, or possibly planet. That might be Jupiter in the corner there. So again, we can see we've got our stars in the center are nice and in focus. And here things are stretching in ways that I don't quite comprehend. There's definitely some different axes at play here, but this astigmatism, yeah, it's a thing. Although not so much in the aperture vignetting, which I guess is good. Aperture vignetting is the in-focus manifestation of cat's eye bokeh on specular highlights. And typically it manifests by a bloat out here and a bloat out here, you know, along a radius from the edge to the center, and then a dark wedge on either side. And there's maybe like a little bit of that effect, but it doesn't look too horrible. Definitely the astigmatism is overpowering it there. So yeah, let's take a look here at the develop module. So first things first, this is wide open, by the way. Let's remove chromatic aberration. Does nothing. So we will defringe with our dropper. That worked good. One click. Yeah, I don't see any more of that blue fringing. So That's a-okay. And then if we enable our profile corrections, we can see what happens here. So first thing, the vignetting is getting corrected, except now you can really see these black edges. That's so curious. I was using a stock camera, so this isn't like a clip-in filter or anything. So yeah, that is interesting. I really wish I would have tried that on the Nikon. It's got less to get in the way, I think. It's just weird to me. I've never seen anything like it before. You can, of course, use flats to correct this. You can use masks and just boost the brightness. You can crop it out, all kinds of things. But that is definitely curious. And one thing I will say, don't see any transformation. Yeah, I don't see any transformation at all. Oh, look at that. Just the teeny tiniest amount. Or maybe not even. It's like no transformation. Or is there? All right, I know this is boring, but let's... Oh my gosh, look at that. Just the slightest stretching in the corners. I'm going to imagine that this makes for a quite distortion-free lens. Huh. Well, cool. That's a new one for me, for sure. There's a lot of things with this that are somewhat unusual. So trade some things in, you know, maybe not the best field curvature, maybe not the best vignetting profile here, but almost no distortion according to Sigma. Interesting. Definitely interesting. All right, well, that brings us to the end of our Lightroom portion, so let's get out of here and wrap up this review. So, what'd you think? Is this lens in contention for a 24mm lens for you? Are you going to choose this one over and above, let's say, the G Master from Sony? Well, that is, of course, entirely your decision. I'm just here to take the samples and talk about what we can see, and you can take it from there. I will say that the 20mm sibling of this lens that was released around the same time and is currently, I think, my favorite 20mm lens on the market, outperforms this one a little bit. It's probably a better overall lens for astrophotography. But as with all things, 20 is not 24mm. And if you really want a 24mm lens, well, this one's in contention. So I really hope you found that useful. If you did, do all the YouTube things. All those buttons are down there. I really appreciate it. And until next time, I'm Darren. This is Fervent Astronomy. Hopefully we'll see you in the next one.